Whoa, hey, welcome to some more news, live from the past. We're broadcasting from a bunker, or there's construction near the studio. So there's no map this week, get over it, move on. Hey, here's some news. How are you all disassociating? Are you dissociating? Me, I'm none of your damn business. Enough with the pleasantries. Let's talk about Stephen Miller, the opposite of pleasantries. He's a weird little freak. Do you dig it, hip cat? Are you with it? His freakness is so apparent, even Trump himself calls him Weird Steven. He has his own Trump nickname. He's reportedly considered a menace by other people in the administration due to his penchant for throwing tantrums. Everyone on both sides of the aisle seems to casually regard Miller as Trump's creepy Wormtongue, his little Cheney over there, whispering black magic. Well, with Miller, it's white magic. Really white magic, or more like a power, some kind of white ability. And it's actually weird, not in a Weird Steven way, that we haven't all sat down and asked what his deal is. Where did he come from? What exactly does he do? Has he always been, like this? I guess no one really wants to look directly into that particular abyss, but it turns out that to understand Stephen Miller is to understand a whole lot behind the MAGA movement. So let's get cozy and dive right into this turd. Stephen Miller, Origins. Oh, sup, weird ask, but did you know it's really helpful for us if you like this video and subscribe if you haven't? Even if you already subscribed up in your old thought meat, actually clicking the button helps us feed the pagan god monster that oversees this show. All hail Argo, master of clicks, lover of torment, devourer of the neonate, and good friends with Stephen Miller. That's our guy today. In case you don't know, he's Trump's deputy chief of staff for policy, as well as his Homeland Security advisor. During Trump's first term, he was his senior advisor and the director of speech writing. He has had a role in everything from Trump's brand, to the inner workings of the White House, to actual policy. He's like the Vince Gilligan of Trump. He may be the most influential goon in the administration, and seems to have been the main engineer behind Trump's slew of authoritarian, probably illegal, executive orders. He's the mastermind behind the flood the zone strategy, explicitly outlining that he wants to overwhelm Trump's so-called enemies, which at this point appears to be the majority of America. Executive orders like the attempt to cancel birthright citizenship are exactly the sort of policy Miller has been salivating over almost his entire life. Like really, his entire life. We'll talk about that. It is, as the Bible says, whack. In a lot of ways, our current leadership is like one big make-a-wish just for Stephen Miller, who is very much influencing our current big boy president guy. Other Republicans, and even Trump himself, acknowledge this. Former Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said, "I call Stephen Trump's brain," which I suppose might be necessary at this point.
But then I look 10 yards to my left and there's a shark over there. So I have a choice of electrocution or shark. You know what I'm going to take? Electrocution. I will take electrocution every single time.
Oh my God, I forgot about that. So many memories. For us, not for Trump. He is not making memories anymore. I really can't stress enough how much Miller is running the worst parts of the MAGA machine. Kristi Noem seems to be at his beck and call, and all the shock and awe actions of ICE, the mass kidnappings, targeting harmless laborers and families, as well as the militarized response to protesters, those all come from Miller's demands. He's the one who told officials to go to Home Depot to round up immigrant workers, rather than going after the vastly smaller number of immigrants who have actually committed crimes. That would be hard after all. Miller wants those large numbers, regardless of whether anyone has actually committed any crimes, and he has the power to do so. One of Trump's advisors admitted it's really Stephen running DHS. And Edward Whalen, the former clerk to dead Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, has said that Stephen Miller is the de facto attorney general. And boy, he's being a real boss baby while doing it. Miller called all ICE field office directors into a room to literally scream at them for not hitting the number of deportations he wanted, and demanded they raise the stats to 3,000 immigrants a day. He promised to fire those in charge of field offices who were at the bottom 10% of monthly arrests, like it's an Amazon fulfillment center for human misery. So, an Amazon fulfillment center. In order to get those destroying lives stats high, Meller wants to eschew any of the pesky obstacles to deportation, like trying to actually investigate who is undocumented. Instead, he has directed ICE to simply round up anyone brown looking at corner stores, Home Depots, 7-Elevens, and so on. You know, like a racist would. Because, yeah, along with being the bony little hand up Trump's Muppet, Meller is also really racist. In fact, according to Donald Trump, Stephen Meller is more racist than Donald Trump, as Trump once said in a private 2024 campaign meeting that if Meller got his way, there would be only 100 million people in the country, all of whom would look like Stephen. Just the President of the United States casually dropping that his main advisor is a white supremacist. As a goof. But that's not the only reason Trump and Meller get along so well. For example, Trump doesn't like note takers or using email, so Meller has coddled this paranoia, putting as little in writing as possible. He flatters Trump in the ways he knows he'll like, such as calling him the most stylish president in our lifetimes. He also rabidly defends Trump's authority, asserting Trump is a victim of a judicial coup by Marxist judges. And as revealed by the leaked signal chats about the strike in Yemen, it was Meller who shut down J.D. Vance's questioning of the operation, saying the president was clear, green light. Meller might be one of the most ardently loyal, true believers in Trump's administration, a real suck-up. Brown shirt noser. A former Trump advisor said, quote, Stephen is the president's id. He has been for a while. It's just now he has the leverage and power to fully effectuate it. And a senior Trump advisor said, I don't know that there is any policy area where his guidance is not sought. The president might not always go with exactly what he wants, but his input is always listened to. Essentially, we have a shadow president, and he's an insufferable and racist freak, a real premium grade, 100% USDA certified fart. And what's rather amazing, or maybe not so amazing, is how Stephen Meller came to be. It's a sort of parable about the realisms of people who become sniveling henchmen. Meller is essentially the Vader to Trump's Palpatine without the redemption arc or ability to woo Natalie Portman. I don't think he could even hold a sword properly, but probably thinks he can. Stephen Miller's mind is not important. It is not special. It is not particularly worthy of dissection. Stephen Meller is fundamentally mundane. His motivations, the details of his childhood, are all painfully petty. He is one of many, many hateful little trolls that exist in this country who happen to rise to prominence due to circumstance and privilege. In another life, he'd be a 40-year-old struggling podcaster posting the N-word on ASMR video comments. But instead, he's one of the most powerful people in the country. That, unfortunately, makes him worthy of exploration. And while we absolutely shouldn't judge a person from their middle school or high school years, for Meller, this is actually important. 2 reasons. First is that so many people from this era seem genuinely aghast that he'd ever be put in power. And second is that Meller hasn't actually changed or evolved much at all from what he was in high school. Basically, we all went to school with that weird bully who became a cop later, only Meller is America's cop. He is the mascot for every pathetic little guy who went on to have power without having to earn it through self-reflection or personal growth. So let's dig into his dumb little past. And to start, there is an incredible book called Hate Monger, Stephen Meller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda by Gene Guerrero that we used for researching this episode. It's very thorough and gives great context for Miller's politics throughout the years. I highly recommend it if you can stomach reading 336 pages about Stephen Meller. Maybe that's your kink. Maybe you get off on reading about racist dweebs. And if so, congrats, now is your time. You might be shocked to learn that Stephen Meller was born in 1985 in godless Santa Monica, California. He's younger than Scarlett Johansson. He was begotten into comfortable circumstances, as many but not all shitheads are. It's a privilege he owes to his impoverished Jewish immigrant ancestors, who came from Russia and Belarus, immigrated to the United States in the early 20th century, who worked as immigrant laborers, and managed to make enough money throughout the generations that set up little Stephen for a nice life. His great-grandfather immigrated to the United States as a refugee fleeing anti-Jewish pogroms in Belarus, did not know how to speak English, and worked until he could send money back to Belarus to allow more of his family to come to the United States, which is known as chain migration. Anyway, all of this was lost on Stephen, who stood on the shoulders of his ancestors' strife to complain about, wokes and immigrants and chicks. But to be fair, and that other thing, he did have some struggles early on, which happens to connect directly to his villain origin story. You see, his family went through a tragic financial crisis that resulted in them having to move from a really, really nice house to just a really nice house. Miller's dad, who ran a real estate company, got tied to a bunch of legal disputes after the Northridge earthquake and ended up having to pay a bunch of attorney's fees. According to Stephen's uncle, David Glosser, they had a rapid descent after a great deal of success. So, in 1998, Miller's family sold their home to live south of the 10 freeway, which happened to be adjacent to a Latino neighborhood. Mind you, it was still a really nice house. 4 bedrooms, 2 stories, they had maids. Maids! But it was a little bit smaller than their old home. You may think that's a relatively underwhelming villain origin story. And it is. But for some people born into privilege, even an ounce of that privilege being threatened is cause for deep humiliation and a desire to have vengeance upon the world. Stephen Meller was forced to live very slightly less comfortably and in a neighborhood that was next to a large Latino population. I don't think it's too much of a stretch that this perceived embarrassment helped lead to his obsessive revenge and hatred toward immigrants. I'm not saying it caused it, but rather that this is one piece of a larger puzzle. A puzzle of a swastika, I guess. Do they make those? Probably not. It's pretty clear that Stephen was obsessed with status and associated certain demographics with his resentment and frustration. He told his childhood friend, Jason Islas, that he hated it when his Latina housekeeper dropped him off at school in her junky car that made him seem poor. Now, it should be noted that Jason Islas is Latino himself. How can Meller be racist when his good friend is Latino? Well, right before high school started, Meller broke up with Jason with a speech about how he was not worthy of Stephen's friendship, and he flat out listed Jason being Latino as a reason they could not remain friends, along with the fact that he was too short. So, yeah, racist. In Jason's own words, the severing of the friendship was cold and brutal. Quote, what he targeted was, looking back, an impressive feat of understanding what I didn't like about myself. It was the opposite of empathy, where you're able to tune into someone's emotional space and then hurt them because you're emotionally aware enough to know what hurts them. He talked about my height. I'm 5'4". I've always been a small kid, shorter on average for most of my life. Still am. He talked about my skin. I didn't have great skin. All the things I had doubts about. And then he topped it off with the whole Latino thing. The conversation was remarkably calm. He expressed hatred for me in a calm, cool, matter-of-fact way. Just to be clear, this is him before high school. And so you might be wondering what made him this way. Was he born a sociopath or indoctrinated early in his life? The answer is yes. Because along with being a turd, Stephen Meller was also a big fan of Rush Limbaugh since childhood and loved The Way Things Ought to Be, a book that coined the term feminazi, ranted about women and feminists, called for the poor to be taxed more, and also sneered about how the lower classes had it too good in this country anyway. Stephen Miller started cultivating his persona early on, wearing a black cowboy hat and reading magazines about guns when he was in middle school and high school. Classic Santa Monica cowboy stuff. You know that moment when you go from elementary school to middle school and you start becoming socially self-aware and take on a new identity? Pretty sure that's the big origin point. When most of us become goths or pretend to skateboard, Miller became a 60-year-old conservative pundit. But like everyone his age, he desperately wanted to be tough and cool, but was neither of those things, which would vex him and ultimately all of us greatly. In addition to Limbaugh, Stephen gorged his growing brain on another slack-jawed racist shock jock, The Larry Elder Show. Larry Elder is a black conservative talk radio host who does not believe in systemic racism and has claimed that welfare is more harmful to black people than slavery. Elder is also a staunch anti-feminist and has said many interesting things about women, including, quote, "Women know less than men about political issues, economics, and current events." He denies that sexism against women in the workplace exists, while also saying that employers should be able to discriminate against pregnant women. He called women who protested Donald Trump's election in 2017 obese and mocked the idea that they would be sexually assaulted, sarcastically saying, "Ladies, I think you're safe," with an image of middle-aged women holding up signs protesting Trump for all that sexual assault stuff. He's just this flaccid little guy saying baseline edgy conservative statements, not really worthy of having influence, which hasn't stopped other flaccid little guys saying baseline edgy conservative statements. And not only did Larry Elder and his show heavily influence Stephen Miller's philosophy, it actually launched Stephen Miller's career. Specifically, Miller used to call into Larry Elder's show to give conservative rants while he was in high school. In high school! He was calling a conservative radio show. Parents, please. If your child is calling into any news radio show, you need to step in. If you're not sure, look for the warning signs, NPR tote bags, leftist tears merch, the need to debate bedtime. When in doubt, just leave some weed on their desk to limit their aspirations. They're free to watch news radio as long as they don't ask what happened to that Joe character. Speaking of weed, I need to go to an ad break. But when we come back, we're going to evolve from Stephen Miller, the spoiled rich shit, to Stephen Miller, the budding debate pro-conservative pundit. But first, enjoy these ads, which are nice to watch because they don't involve Stephen Miller, a real piece of shit.
A-hole, fart box, King Toot's tomb, the Chuckle Hut. Dirty words for your butt are only dirty if you wipe. It's a paradox, I guess. But with the Tushy Bidet, you don't have to wipe anymore. Not in a weird way, but rather because Tushy cleans your bottom for you with a beautiful stream of fresh water. Like it's just spitting up there. I have one, folks, and I love it. It attaches to your existing toilet without any additional plumbing, and it makes me feel fresher and just generally superior as a person. It obviously cuts down on your toilet paper use and makes your puppet hole feel better overall. No hole problems when you don't have to physically wipe at it like a cat pawing at a mouse's nest. No clogged toilets, butt feels great. It even has a dryer, like at the end of a car wash. It's the future of butts. So remember, a-hole is only a dirty word if you wipe. For a limited time, our listeners get 10% off their first bidet order when you use code SMN at checkout. That is 10% off your first bidet order at hellotushy.com with promo code SMN. Invest in your butt, friends. You won't regret it. That's a promise.
Hey, we're back! Must be nice to have had a brief moment away from Stephen Miller, America's current ghoul and future Nuremberg trial centerpiece. So we are now going from Miller as a budding little rich racist kid from Santa Monica to his beginnings as a full-blown conservative mouthpiece. Aside from his little "you're not my friend anymore because you're brown" PowerPoint presentation, Stephen Miller's sociopathic tendencies were present throughout his childhood and young adulthood. At times, it was just casually headed, like in Hebrew school, when the children were discussing how to divide up a slice of pizza, he ended the ethical debate by putting his palm on it to claim it all for himself. Again, there's an amazing amount of stories from people who knew him during these times, likely because none of them can fully believe that such a crab ass obtained so much power. Also, it's Santa Monica, which means that people from the entertainment industry, who perhaps like to talk, are talking, such as this former classmate and stand-up comedian Charles Gould.
Stephen Miller was never bullied in high school. Stephen Miller was the bully. Stephen Miller bullied kids in our school who were new to this country, who were learning English as a second language. He bullied the kids who are already marginalized by our society, and he continues to do that from the White House today.
He's not the only person to describe teenage Miller this way. His oddities became more malignant in high school when he seemed obsessed with status and asserting his dominance in cruel, often weird ways. He would interrogate waiters about the food or about their lives. He would harass Latino students, particularly those who were part of the Chicano student movement, telling them to speak only English in his presence and go back to your country, to Latino students, regardless of whether they were born in the United States. He would loom over and scream at new immigrant students. Boy, it sure sounds like he hated Latino people simply for being Latino. I think that's called something? There's a word for it. And just to be thorough, this is backed up not just by a stand-up comic, but by very serious people who were once classmates with Miller, including this lady named Cynthia Santiago.
So in high school, I was also a member of Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán. It's MECHA, and it promoted cultural heritage and pride in your background, but it also promoted, an access to higher education. And he was known to go to those meetings and stand outside and harass some of the members that were trying to leave those meetings. So I believe that the statements about English only were because he viewed these groups, the groups of pride and heritage, as being groups that didn't promote American values.
Dude just really hated Latinos. He made it his entire identity. When teachers would speak to students in Spanish, Stephen would yell at the teachers, "This is America, we speak English." Miller's high school counselor, Oscar de la Torre, convened a committee on equality at Stephen's high school library. Stephen attended and opined to the attendees, "Racism does not exist. It's in your imagination." Probably not in Jason Isla's imagination, but whatever. He would later claim that the idea there was discrimination at his high school was a way of excusing Black and Hispanic behavior by holding those students to a lower standard. Miller would later, after graduating, go on a years-long crusade against this high school counselor and try to get him fired. Yes, that's right. After graduating, he was still obsessed with this. And you could argue that perhaps he never stopped being obsessed with this. Miller tried to smear De La Torre as a dangerous gang sympathizer on conservative writer David Horowitz's website. Why? Because Oscar de la Torre hosted events about racism and had also invited public speakers to the high school to advocate for peace between students. Still, Miller tried to take down De La Torre by labeling him a dangerous man, trying to get him fired and put out of business, and sharing De La Torre's email address to encourage harassment against him. And then his efforts were rewarded by the white supremacist website American Renaissance, which reposted Stephen Miller's articles. Again, parents, maybe step in if your kid's writing is getting boosted by racists. One of the few times you can slam them. But even before the harassment, De La Torre had grown to know Stephen Miller to be a type of professional bully at the school. as he would regularly haunt school district meetings and would rail against bilingual studies, any Spanish language or multicultural activities in school, including Cinco de Mayo, or claim the gay club was ruining the school. Counselor Oscar de la Torre recalled of Stephen, quote, "One thing you gotta give him is he would do his homework. He knew all the right-wing commentators, whatever they were espousing. He knew the rhetoric. He didn't come with an open heart. He came with a shield and a sword. He was a master of feeling out the room and knowing how to elicit an emotional response. Once he got that anger, it was like, that's right. It was almost like gotcha. He felt a sense of fulfillment. You could see it in his eyes, and it was just wicked. There's no other word to describe the feeling. It was wickedness. He was born with an ability to bring out anger from people, and he rejoiced in that. It made him powerful. He became important that way." That's Stephen Miller's high school counselor describing him as wicked, like he's Dr. Loomis hunting Michael Myers. If you need any more evidence, you can actually watch a video of Stephen Miller during this time. You see, he was also super into the idea of torture, because of course he was, and was videotaped giving a smirking speech about how great torture is on the bus to school while using a microphone for some reason.
Because the goal of any military conflict is to kill as few people as possible, but as for Saddam Hussein and his henchmen, I think the ideal solution would be to cut off their fingers. I don't think it's necessary to kill them entirely. We're not a barbaric people. We respect life. Therefore, torture is the way to go. Because torture people can live. Torture is a celebration of life and human dignity. We need to remember that as we enter these very dark and dangerous times in the next century. And I only hope that many of my peers and people who will be leading this country will appreciate the value and respect that torture shows towards other cultures.
Just that creepy little bully edgelord kid we all knew, who never grew up or changed, becoming the top advisor to the President of the United States. He was just this angry, unpopular kid going around starting fights with people until his face turned red. Literally red. A student who would witness these arguments recalled he would come up and start to pick a fight with you, and his face would turn bright red. I don't know if it was passion or heated debate, or he was just angry all the time. It was hard to tell. But he put on this real victimization attitude. It didn't feel particularly civil or curious. He's just such a weird and off-putting loser. I don't know how else to frame it. Like, obviously, a lot of us were weird losers in high school, but there's this unique special sauce where the person is also mean that results in something far more sinister. See Musk, Elon. And I think it has to do with the fact that they never grew out of it. They created this shitty edgelord persona and decided that was what they were going to be forever. For instance, he started styling himself after mobsters in high school, according to classmates. One of them recalled that he'd wear like a gold mafia-style ring on his finger. It was just bizarre. Everyone commented on his weird jewelry, and I think he would wear a gold chain too, occasionally. You know the stupid Mr. Burns / Dr. Evil Hands thing he always does? This stuff?
To conduct sensitive intelligence operations, but based upon race and sex. And obviously, that is unacceptable. It's going to be merit-based across the whole federal government.
Well, he started doing it in high school because he was copying Robert De Niro's character, Sam Ace Rothstein, in Casino. Because, of course, he misunderstood Scorsese films. I bet he loves Fight Club and Boondock Saints, too. A lot of people do this kind of stuff in high school. Not many make it their whole personality in adulthood. And it is important to note when someone is like this. See, there's a moment in every young adult's life when an older adult, usually a teacher or parent, tells them to cut the shit. That they need to start showering more or treat people with respect. Stop wearing that straw boater hat everywhere, even though it looked great on me. Or, take some kind of responsibility for themselves, that they need to make adjustments. I'm not saying all this advice is always good, because adults are often stupid too. What I'm identifying is a moment of humility we are all faced with. And some people cannot handle it, and double down and obsess and refuse to grow. And Miller's life really seems like a series of those moments. Somewhere down the road, he decided that he was superior to other people. Smarter, whiter, richer, whiter. And he used that perceived status to refuse any self-growth. A very clear example of all of this was his inability to simply clean up after himself. In high school, when going on stage to give a speech to try out to become the school announcer, he went on a tirade about having to pick up trash when there are janitors who are paid to do it for them. And yes, we have video of this.
Am I the only one who is sick and tired of being told to pick up my trash when we have plenty of janitors who are paid to do it for us?
No teenager likes picking up after themselves, right? But eventually, we all realize it's just a basic part of life. Except this wrathful refusal of refuse removal, a baseline courtesy, would become a long-running theme with him. Miller was obsessed with the concept of cleaning up his own garbage. When students were told to pick up their trash during a pep rally, Stephen went on a rant saying, "Throw your trash down! They need work! We pay them to do that!" And he continued this fixation in freaking college. A classmate at Duke University saw him throw his plate of food away but missed the trash can, everything falling on the floor. When the student asked if he was going to pick it up, Stephen replied, "What hellhole are you from? We have people here for that." Of course, one can easily imagine Stephen seeing a Latino person doing the exact same thing, but Stephen says, "What hellhole are you from? We clean up after ourselves here. We're civilized." Other classmates say he would leave his food tray on the table or toss it on the ground and say, "There were people there paid to clean it up." When students were asked to keep a common room clean, Stephen typed up a fucking 2-page reply claiming that the janitors should be responsible, saying cleaning is a fine personal virtue, but ultimately it's the responsibility of the janitorial staff to ensure that it's clean. And it's too bad that $40,000 a year doesn't make sure that people understand that. Jesus Christ. In the time it took you to write your manifesto, you could have picked up that candy bar wrapper. Just pick up the wrapper. Now, I don't want to generalize, but there's a clear pattern of people on the right talking about schools and colleges as these leftist indoctrination factories, who very obviously just had a bad time themselves. They often act like victims and say that they had their free speech taken away, or that no one would engage in honest debate, and Miller was one of these people. Despite getting away with so much bullshit, he has since painted himself as a victim during this time, later claiming that he was alienated by other students who would tattle on him rather than engage in spirited open debate, and that these years were, quote, "some of the toughest challenges I faced in my life." If you've ever seen that one 30 Rock episode where Liz thought she was bullied in school and then realizes she was actually the bully, this is that. And so going back to those right-wingers who talk about oppressive college campuses, well, how many of them were just pricks? Like, when they talk about being bullied for their conservative beliefs, we should ask, which beliefs? How did they express those beliefs? Were they being yelled at for wanting a small government? Lower taxes? Somehow, I don't think so. I think maybe a lot of them were just saying stupid, probably racist trash, and then other people told them to shut up. This idea that you have to debate someone who, say, hates all Latino people and loves torture, it's stupid. Shut up is what I say to that. But for the modern right-wing movement, a lot of famous people have been birthed from exactly this, including Stephen Miller. There's actually a really good story that perfectly encapsulates this false victimhood mentality. Along with being a frequent caller to the Larry Elder conservative radio show, Miller also deeply admired the conservative writer and totally not a white supremacist David Horowitz. God rest his soul if he had one. Horowitz went from being a Marxist to being an extreme conservative with white supremacist, white sympathizer views. Unfortunately, I have to go into a little detail about Horowitz's views because he is probably the most important person in Stephen Miller's life. Here's an amuse-bouche of Horowitz's racism. In his 4chan-esque before 4chan essay, Guns Don't Kill Black People, Other Blacks Do, he wrote, "Unfortunately, as a nation, we have become so trapped in the melodrama of black victimization and white oppression that we are in danger of losing all sense of proportion. If blacks are oppressed in America, why isn't there a black exodus?" Famously, whenever people are oppressed, they can simply use all their oppression money to leave the country and live somewhere else. Here's another nugget from the mind of Horowitz from his article, 10 Reasons Why Reparations for Slavery is a Bad Idea, and Racist Too. Quote, "If not for the sacrifices of white soldiers and a white American president who gave his life to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, blacks in America would still be slaves. Where's the gratitude of Black America and its leaders for those gifts? Yeah, black people, where's the gratitude towards white people for deciding not to enslave you anymore? You're welcome." The point is, David Horowitz was not a nice or reasonable guy, and was very racist and seemingly stupid, and young Stephen Miller absolutely loved him. He loved this objectively racist and wrong person, so much so that he invited Horowitz to give a talk at his high school, which he did, ranting about how racism in America was a lie and that liberals ruined everything. Miller and Horowitz were horrifically persecuted by the student body. As Miller wrote, they were rude, sometimes interrupting Horowitz's speech. In other words, Miller petitioned for his school to let a bold racist speak, the school allowed it, and then he whined when the students were slightly rude, quote, sometimes. Later on, Horowitz invited Miller to his house, something libs of TikTok might call grooming. While there, Stephen endeared himself to Horowitz by claiming he'd grown up in a liberal family and, being a self-made conservative boy genius, rebelled against them. Which is a lie. A pretty telling one, actually. You see, Horowitz actually did grow up in a leftist household and turned into a conservative. Miller knew this and lied to force a bond between them. And just as notably, this plays into his victim narrative. In reality, according to Stephen's uncle, his dad was a real estate developer who was a free market Reagan Republican. But Miller was fine throwing him under the lib bus to get what he wanted. Damn lib bus probably runs on biofuel. So in the absence of any actual persecution, Miller, a fascist, manufactured it on his own. He was not a rebel against a liberal family who hated him. In fact, the worst thing that is documented in terms of childhood abuse is that his family was emotionally distant. His father was often busy, and he complained to a childhood friend about being given the silent treatment when he got in trouble. But his father was an ardent free market capitalist and anti-regulations conservative. While it's true Miller's father used to be a Democrat, he switched sides after becoming a real estate developer and realizing that regulations made it a little harder for him to make even more money. This happened when Miller was still a young child. Stephen Miller's maternal uncle said that Michael Miller, Stephen's father, was, quote, a traditional economic Republican who, over the years, became more and more embittered over regulation and what he felt was the intrusion into his personal and business affairs by what he called the ridiculous liberal elite of the West Coast around California. He was convinced that American universities and colleges were more or less dominated by the extreme left-wing political view of the world. So, Stephen Miller was raised by a right-wing businessman who got mad at regulations and thought that colleges were overrun by lefties. Miller wasn't some innocent centrist who turned to the right after seeing how unreasonable the other side was. He went into school already thinking that, looking for confirmation. And then he changed his story after the fact. He would whine that he was being tattled on and his parents would back him up. When the superintendent called Stephen's parents about his repeated appearances on the Larry Elder Show, his parents defended him. In fact, even for being as open of a prick as he was, there's little evidence that he even saw that much pushback from anyone. He had a column in multiple school newspapers where he was allowed to espouse xenophobic and homophobic views. The crap they let him publish was incredibly heinous, and yet he had the freedom to write it. Because it's America. He thinks smoking is cool, so he used his Duke University column to call doctors unrelenting health fascists because they advocate against smoking, and claimed they were lying about smoking being dangerous. Miller also wrote an op-ed attacking ESL students, gay students, and called Native Americans evil, quoting young Stephen, "And just in case your son or daughter decides at their tender age that they are gay, we have a club on campus that will gladly help foster their homosexuality. Do they notify parents if their teenagers have chosen an alternate lifestyle? Of course not." Of the Native American genocide, he wrote, "I suppose then that our country would have been better off if our soldiers never killed anyone, and we watched as our nation was obliterated by the evil in the world as we sung songs of peace and love. Or, better yet, we could have lived with the Indians, learning how to finger paint and make teepees, excusing their scalping of frontiersmen as part of their culture." Just imagine the worst opinion someone could have about something, and that was his opinion. This is pretty important. Young Stephen Miller was never denied his rights to free speech at his high school, and in fact was given quite a lot of leeway and a platform for saying heinous things. What he was not given was the right to force other students to like him for his bad opinions. While there's not much evidence that Stephen was bullied, plenty of students formed negative opinions of him because he actively attacked and provoked them. To Stephen, persecution means that you suffer the consequences of your own antisocial behavior. And freedom of speech means forcing people to swallow every foul thing you have to say without saying anything back to you. In his bi-weekly op-ed Duke University column that the silenced Miller somehow obtained, Stephen would both argue that Duke needed more political diversity on campus, aka more conservatism, while also arguing that political views he didn't like should be silenced. He argued against the university allowing Maya Angelou to be the convocation speaker and decreed that because America is majority Christian, people should stop saying happy holidays and demanded Duke put up a Merry Christmas banner instead. That's his version of free speech. Not to include, but to replace. Stephen learned from his mentor, David Horowitz, how to use the language of liberalism, such as academic freedom, in order to push his authoritarian ideology. He wanted to destroy the Palestine Solidarity movement at Duke University, so he established a chapter of the ironically named Horowitz's Students for Academic Freedom. He then used it to target the Palestine Solidarity movement, handing out flyers labeling them terrorist supporters with the goal to shut them down. Boy, he loves calling people he doesn't like terrorists, doesn't he? He used his column in the Duke University newspaper to whine about multiculturalism, writing, "As we obsess over, adulate, and extol the non-American cultures, we ignore the culture we all hold in common." He defended a conservative radio host Bill Bennett's statement that aborting every black baby in America would make the crime rate go down, and then whined about being called racist, complaining that when a woman called him racist, he was disturbed by the private and public slander, by an accusation that was so grotesquely false and baseless. But sadly, it was far from the first time someone had created this paranoid illusion. What a baby. Also a liar. It's the exact same tactic of someone who throws gum at you and then runs to his mom when you flip them off. That kid on the bus started it. And this use of free speech as both a sword and shield has continued on throughout his career, like how he calls protests against the Trump administration an insurrection against the laws and sovereignty of the United States. Meanwhile, the Trump supporters who violently broke into the Capitol on January 6th were victims, according to Stephen Miller, who lied about the rioters not getting due process. Quote, "It wasn't merely difficult to get due process, it was impossible. The entire system was rigged against you. All of it. Those persecuted Americans could only dream of the due process afforded illegal aliens." Oh, hey, that reminds me of this other thing.
We've got some breaking news into us just now. The White House says it is actively looking at suspending due process rights for migrants. That, according to top advisor to the president, Stephen Miller.
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at.
He really is just the mini-boss of Republican hypocrisy. He's obviously not the only person like this, but Stephen Miller's talent, if you want to call it that, stems from how much he's honed this hypocrisy in, whining about his free speech and human rights while simultaneously snuffing out other people's, being the victim while actively victimizing others. And he knows he's doing it. You can see it on his face. He knows it doesn't matter. When he was in high school, he lied about one of his teachers trampling on a flag to the Larry Elder show. What actually happened is the teacher placed the flag on the floor and asked the students to discuss why a symbol mattered to them. When he was confronted about his lie by a fellow student, Stephen told the classmate, quote, "It doesn't matter what the truth is, but how it makes people feel." Oof. Extremely relevant to today. Even Larry Elder seemed to intuit that Miller treated things like a game, saying in odd praise, "Stephen came on my show and I thought he was amazingly articulate, full of energy and passion, and he seemed to understand concepts I didn't get until I was much, much older. He took it very seriously, almost like a game, like you prepare for a test or athletic contests. He said he thought about it all day, thought about what he was going to say, and I was just so impressed." This is where Miller goes from being an ordinary racist in the crowd to developing something unique. Anyone can be a manipulative asshole, but Miller made it a profession. I wouldn't be surprised if he was specifically aspiring to become a right-wing propagandist since high school. Like if his bedroom walls had posters of Lee Atwater on them, or as he's made clearer in recent months, Joseph Goebbels. You know he definitely didn't have like Magic Johnson up there. Anyway, while in college, Stephen began to really hone in his racism. At Duke University, Stephen worked with future white nationalist Richard Spencer to organize an immigration debate. They invited white nationalist, anti-immigrant author Peter Brimelow to debate pro-immigration speaker Peter Laffer. That debate seemed to actually go quite well for Laffer, who requested tapes of the event to use for publicity. Except Miller and Spencer never gave him a copy, claiming they couldn't locate it. Wah, wah. Anyway, Richard Spencer has a very different perspective on their relationship than what Stephen Miller claims. Miller says, "I have absolutely no relationship with Mr. Spencer. I completely repudiate his views and his claims are 100% false." Spencer, meanwhile, said, "I don't think we were like the best of friends or something like that, but we were definitely friends. I respected him." Spencer also said he realizes Miller can't say everything he wants about the so-called superiority of the white race, explaining he probably wouldn't say that explicitly. He might not even want to think about it explicitly, because we can't just assert ourselves and our white identity in this basic fashion. We instead want to focus on all these negative things and kind of dog whistle. It's the classic tale of unrequited love between an open white supremacist and the boy whose political ambitions mean that he can't explicitly say he's a white supremacist. A real Romeo plus Juliet. Racist Plus, is that new Daily Wire streaming service? Anyway, while I guess you can pretend to believe Stephen Miller's version of that, it should be noted that Richard Spencer is far from the only white nationalist he was pals with. Apparently, Miller was very impacted by Peter Brimelow, that anti-immigration speaker he invited to the debate. When he unofficially collaborated with Breitbart, he would send them Brimelow's writing to use as inspiration for articles. For a little taste of Brimelow's ideas, he complained that NYC subways and immigration offices are an underworld that is not just teeming, but is also almost entirely colored. So, not really a racist dog whistle, but like a racist version of that creepypasta Siren Head dude. Should be noted that Brimelow does not like being called a white nationalist, having sued the New York Times over it, clarifying he's a civic nationalist. Good to know. This white nationalist also runs the VDare anti-immigration website, which he says features articles by those who aim to defend the interests of whites. So, a white nationalist. VDare is a designated hate group. Like when Brimelow wrote an op-ed defending VDare and claiming they weren't a white nationalist website, even that op-ed included the quote, "We also publish on VDare.com a few writers, for example, Jared Taylor, whom I would regard as white nationalist, in the sense that they aim to defend the interests of American whites." You see, They aren't a white nationalist website. They simply are a website that supports white nationalists, and Stephen Miller loves them. Feels like I skipped right over the part where Stephen Miller used to send Breitbart white nationalist articles to use for their articles. It's almost like there's been this bubbling far-right racist movement lurking right under the surface of the Republican Party, working for decades to normalize white nationalism. Boy, I wish a bunch of people had told everyone about that without being ignored or called alarmist. If such people did exist, maybe other people should finally listen to them. Also, we super have to go to an ad, but I want you to remember VDare and Breitbart and that guy David Horowitz. These are all the mechanisms that will bring about Stephen Miller's rise to political power. Yes, he rose specifically through racists, and we'll talk about that after the break, which, as I promised before, will not feature Stephen Miller in any way. Enjoy that. Value the little things. Oh, doggy, it's cooling down out there. I mean, not here in Los Angeles, but you get it. It's fall. But in here, in the kitchen, you see, it's heating up. It's heating up because it's football season. It's football season. Not here in Los Angeles. We outlawed sports, but you get it. People coming over to watch the balls. You gotta cook for them and look good while doing it. That's why there's Hexclad, the cookware that's strong, effective, and looks pretty laying on your counter. Like me, I'm stainless steel, baby, and so is it. Toxin-free, non-stick, Hexclad 6-piece and 12-piece sets take the guesswork out of cooking. Katy wanted me to tell you she gave her sister-in-law Hexclad last year for Christmas, and every time she sees her, she's like, thank you so much, we love it, we use it all the time. Listen, I've been known to cook a ham or two. That's actually not true, I don't eat ham. Those poor pigs. But Hexclad really ups my, again, not ham, it ups my cooking, the cooking. It's so nice to have like all the ham stuff. Cooking this stuff with the thing. Look, whether you're a new cook or a seasoned chef, a really nice and long-lasting matching set of cookware just makes you feel like an adult. It's like me saying I go to the dentist regularly. It's a beautiful lie. Game days are here. It's time to upgrade your kitchen for hosting season. Get 10% off at hexclad.com/SMN and make sure your spread is as strong as your lineup. That's HEXCLAD.com/SMN. Let Hexclad know we sent you and experience the ultimate upgrade in your kitchen with Hexclad's superior performance. Ham. Not ham. Bye.
Wowie zowie! It's sort of September, in that it's the month after September, and Pluto TV is streaming CBS hits for free. Full seasons you love, such as the courtroom drama that is Matlock, or whatever Fire Country is. There's also Ghosts, which is about ghosts, and y'all know I love some ghosts. And of course, NCIS Origins, not to mention BYOB Gravel Island, TGIF, BYOB, FX40, The Brief Misadventures of Horse Dog, A, and also the spinoff B. What else? What else is there? Oh, right. There's Scuba, the self-contained underwater breathing anteater, CSI Dumpster, Barbecue Potato Salad Mysteries 4, The Gun Wrestling Showdown 20V Vampire Edition, and of course, Why? I think that's all of them, all of the shows, and all of them for free. That's full seasons of the CBS shows you love this month only, which was last month, on Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never. Ow!
Damn it, we're back. That's a shame. Whenever we cut to ads, my consciousness falls into total oblivion, like the moments between dreaming and waking up. I imagine that's what death is like, and honestly, most of the time, I find it to be absolutely terrifying. But I'd much rather that over thinking about Stephen Miller. Anyway, we've done the high school and college years, so it's time to talk about that reunion where Zach Morris was governor of California. Except we're talking about Stephen Miller here, so instead of a charismatic, cool teen with a heart of gold, it's an off-putting, unlikable, unrepentant, racist piece of shit. But still, he's the big boy in power. And as I mentioned, he pretty much ascended through hate. Specifically, David Horowitz got him a job as Michelle Bachmann's press secretary, during which time he helped cement the Tea Party Republican brand as being that thing I just said: off-putting, unrepentant racists. In a very familiar move, he found a single tragedy, a school bus accident involving an undocumented immigrant, and then used that to label all undocumented immigrants monsters. Then, with David Horowitz's help, Miller hopped over to Senator Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III's team, becoming his press secretary. You'll notice that Horowitz is basically his manager at this point, passing Miller around like a joint. Hey, you want to borrow my racist for a few months? No problemo. I mean, problem. We speak English here. Please don't think I'm not racist. And this is when he used his years of racist experience to send white supremacist blogs and writings to Breitbart writers, instructing them to launder them into articles on their website. This, of course, included articles from Brimelo's VDare website that's totally not white nationalist, but publishes white nationalists. Miller also sent articles from the proudly white nationalist website American Renaissance, a website he was so familiar with, he referred to it as AmRen in his communications with Breitbart. As was his typical shtick, he used the website to feed Breitbart stories highlighting individual crimes done by black people or immigrants. You know, the classic technique that Nazis did in publishing lists of crimes done by Jews. Really can't stress enough how sinister this is. Like, it's the kind of stuff you're gonna see in future documentaries about this era. A man who grew up proudly hating immigrants, latched onto the Republican Party like a tick. He then took openly white nationalist ideas and passed them to a somewhat less extremist right-wing website with the explicit purpose of making those ideas more mainstream. For example, Brimelo's website promotes the conspiracy theory of white genocide, the idea that brown immigrants are replacing white people in America. That is now an increasingly normalized idea in America. It's a freaking Republican talking point now.
What appears to them is we're replacing national-born American, native-born Americans to permanently transform the political landscape.
Is it really they want to remake the demographics of America to ensure that they stay in power forever?
They can't win re-election in 2022 unless they bring in a large number of new voters to replace the voters that are already here. That's what this is about. We have an invasion in this country.
This is why so many people feel like they're losing their minds. Ideas that were once considered to be extreme white supremacist beliefs by most of America are just said in passing by some of the people in charge of making our laws. Are we being pranked? Did we all die? Is that why no one on the bus laughed at my joke? This is Stephen Miller's legacy. He funneled these racist articles through Breitbart in a campaign to stop immigration reform, and it worked. It seems that Stephen Miller was instrumental in stopping bipartisan immigration reform back in 2013. At this time, we had the Gang of Eight who sought to fix the completely broken immigration system in the United States, and included both prominent Republicans and Democrats. Miller managed to help kill the reform both by using Breitbart to whip people up into a hateful frenzy, as well as utilizing his role as Jeff Sessions' press secretary, sharing anti-immigration talking points with Sessions and other Republican lawmakers for a coordinated attack on immigration reform. He brought the language of white nationalist websites, laundered it through Breitbart, then gave it to Republican lawmakers to use in Washington. Ex-Breitbart editor Katy McHugh, who was the one who leaked the Breitbart emails to Southern Poverty Law Center, said that Stephen Miller had incredible power over the website, and also that he's a white supremacist. She has some expertise on the subject, given that she used to be a white supremacist as well while working at Breitbart. And only after being fired for being too racist in her tweets was she able to become de-radicalized. Yeah. When Breitbart fires you for racism seems like a good time to look in the mirror. So according to McHugh, Miller was introduced to me as someone that I would take editorial direction from as I was reporting on the immigration beat and criminal justice beat. It was not like, here's someone from a Senate office, he may pitch you stories. It was understood that Miller had editorial control over the political section. McHugh also said of Miller, quote, "I would absolutely call him a white supremacist. And this is a person who believes in discredited race science and eugenics in how you craft policy to hurt people, especially people of color, especially Muslims." Boy, is he racist. The most racist. King racist. But Miller was smart enough to realize he had to launder his white supremacist views through something respectable. So he used the guise of statistics and research to offer more credence to his campaign against immigration reform. This was done by coordinating with the Center for Immigration Studies, the Federation for Immigration Reform, and Numbers USA, which all sound like normal, respectable institutions until you find out that they're all financed by foaming at the mouth white supremacists. I mean, in retrospect, Numbers USA? That's like if a secret alien called themselves Guy Human Person. Specifically, these groups were founded by anti-immigration advocates Cordelia Scaife May and John Tanton. Here is a sample platter of their unique perspectives. John Tanton once said, "As whites see their power and control over their lives declining, will they simply go quietly into the night, or will there be an explosion?" Cordelia Scaife May said that the U.S. was being invaded on all fronts by immigrants who breed like hamsters. And I have to tell you this, not just because it ends up being relevant to Stephen Miller, but it's absolutely fucking wild. These two founders of the main anti-immigration think tanks in the United States were fans of the book The Camp of the Saints by Jean Raspail, which was a highly masturbatory fantasy about the end of the white race. In the book, the whites are defeated by, and this is the actual term used by the author, a quote, turd eater from India, who leads a group of migrants who are described by the book's author as, so many terrible quotes, all the kinky-haired, swarthy-skinned, long-despised phantoms, all the teeming ants toiling for the white man's comfort, all the swill men and sweepers, the troglodytes, the stinking drudges, the swivel-hipped menials, the womanless wretches, the lung-spewing hackers, all the numberless, nameless, tortured, tormented, indispensable mass. I'm so tired of quoting racists, you guys. I long for that dream abyss, or that breath liquid from the abyss. So here's the part where I wish I had a corkboard that wasn't already being used to connect Trump to Epstein. Apparently, not only did this disturbingly racist work of fiction inspire the founders of all those anti-immigration think tanks that Stephen Miller used to stop immigration reform, but of course the book was a direct influence on Stephen Miller's writings. He directly referenced the wretched fucking book in his emails to Breitbart, recommending that they write, I guess a positive review of the book. And not only that, but those think tank founders, Cordelia Scaife May and John Tanton, also fucking funded David Horowitz, Stephen Miller's mentor, and his Freedom Center Foundation. Oh, also, apparently Steve Bannon has referenced the book. Basically, it's a cute little white nationalist book club that is responsible for destroying immigration reform and also responsible for Stephen Miller turning the U.S. into an authoritarian hellhole. A book whose main antagonist is called the Turd Eater because the author, to show us that brown people are bad, explains that this villain eats doo-doo poop. This great big sludge of very stupid racists conspiring to seep into the American mainstream. And seep they did, thanks to one sleazy casino failure descending from an escalator to declare that all Mexicans are rapists. Except for the assumed some good people, of course. Trump was perfect for Stephen Miller, a total godsend for every one of these hideous racists scratching at the doors. Trump has the, charisma that Stephen Miller lacks, and Stephen Miller has the ability to launder straight-up white nationalist propaganda into something with a more populist appeal. Not to mention that they have similar shitty taste. He loves the tacky mobster cosplay, as we talked about before. Miller loves Las Vegas, the pageantry of it, apparently having visited Vegas in brightly colored outfits similar to De Niro's clothing in Casino. Stephen Miller begged to be connected to Trump in 2016. Seeing Trump as the perfect, willing voice box for his ideology. He successfully became Trump's speechwriter and used all the lessons he learned from the white supremacist book about turd eaters in Trump's speeches. Recently, he got Trump to drop a Heil Hitler meme, 1488, in his speech to the military about how they're going to fight a war against the enemy within. Blatant fascism stuff. He continued to pick David Horowitz's brain for talking points. After being solicited for advice by Miller, Horowitz, in an email, gave him a soundbite saying, "The inner cities are war zones. BLM makes criminals into martyrs and incites violence against the police. something Horowitz said Democrats are 100% responsible for. Cut to Trump, not long after Stephen Miller's email exchange, saying this.
Crime at levels that nobody's seen. You can go to war zones in countries that we're fighting, and it's safer than living in some of our inner cities. They're run by the Democrats. We'll get rid of the crime. You'll be able to walk down the street without getting shot. Right now, you walk down the street, you get shot.
If you're wondering why Trump seems to actually have a pulse here, it's because this was from over 9 years ago. Guys, it's hard to fully explain how fucking scary this timeline is. A growing white nationalist movement in the United States coincided perfectly with the rise of an openly racist populist, and then planted a fellow white supremacist on his staff directly in his ear, and then he became the fucking president. Miller has been there the entire time dictating Trump's policy. He was behind the Muslim ban and family separation policies. When images of Trump and Miller's border policy of children crying for their parents and being kept in cages hit the media, a White House advisor told Vanity Fair that Stephen Miller actually enjoys seeing those pictures at the border. But during Trump's first term, Miller was frustrated he couldn't go even further with deportations. He famously would berate and scream at lower-level staffers, and in one instance reportedly said, "I didn't mean to come across as harsh, it's just that this is all I care about. I don't have a family, I don't have anything else, this is my life." Honestly, this is one instance where I believe he's telling the truth. I say this acknowledging the fact that he now has a wife and 3 children. Stephen Miller has zero interest in actually making America great. He's a sad, angry little guy who spent his whole life spewing racist edgelord shit and wants revenge on the people who told him to get fucked. He's like a school shooter playing the longest con ever. He simply hates minorities and enjoys subjugating them. He hates schools and universities, which he sees as unfairly liberal, and wants to enact revenge upon them. That's it. It's not complicated. During Biden's presidency, Stephen Miller did not simply go into hibernation, he was a very busy boy. He wasn't like most of Trump's toadies who tried to make as much money as possible by going into consulting or cable news or podcasting. Instead, he established the America First Legal Foundation, a nonprofit that is basically the anti-ACLU. The AFLF, or ALF, raises millions of dollars from far-right slush funds in order to bring lawsuits against any policies that benefit minorities, such as programs to try to pull people out of poverty. They waged a lawsuit against the Johns Hopkins program for class-based affirmative action, arguing that minorities are more likely to be poor and so more likely to benefit from programs designed to help the poor. Don't think about that too hard because your brain will melt and then seep out of your eyes. No, those aren't tears, they're brain. Other than lawsuits against LGBTQ rights, abortion rights, and civil rights, Miller's ALF also funded racially divisive political campaign ads to help Trump get reelected after Biden. The radio, TV, and online ads accused the Biden administration of anti-white bigotry. Just full throttle into the idea that white people were being persecuted. Here is one of these ads, which just straight up sounds like satire.
When did racism against white people become okay? Joe Biden put white people last in line for COVID relief funds. Kamala Harris said disaster aid should go to non-white citizens first. Liberal politicians block access to medicine based on skin color. Progressive corporations, airlines, universities all openly discriminate against white Americans. Racism is always wrong. The left's anti-white bigotry must stop. We are all entitled to equal treatment under law. America First Legal paid for this ad.
Yeesh! He's basically using the fact that minorities tend to live in higher poverty areas and had higher rates of COVID infections as a way to say that they were given preferred treatment, very similar to that Johns Hopkins lawsuit and a lot of right-wing talking points. Basically, they use efforts to fight systemic and generational racism, or the effects of that racism, to act like white people are being discriminated against. It's kind of brilliant in how evil it is, because they're using the exact evidence of racism to claim that black people actually have it good. It's like complaining about how car accident victims get all the good drugs. But of course, to use a familiar quote, it doesn't matter what the truth is, but how it makes people feel. And what's even more outrageous, they also targeted Black and Hispanic communities with different ads. Instead of appealing to racism, they leveraged anti-LGBTQ hate, because that's the value of having multiple types of groups you can scapegoat.
Not long ago, everyone knew that you're either born a boy or girl. Not anymore. The Biden administration is pushing radical gender experiments on children.
Hey, white people! Democrats are anti-white, and black people are taking away your stuff. Be mad at Democrats and black people. Also, hey, black people! Democrats are transing your kids and turning boys into girls. Be mad at Democrats and trans people. Miller is a hate artist, a racist Rembrandt, the Lin-Manuel Miranda of propaganda, if you're a Lin-Manuel Miranda fan. This is his one true talent. His ALF group is now helping the Trump administration's judicial onslaught by bringing cases to the Supreme Court to uphold bans on gender-affirming care, attacking the Palestine Liberation Organization, and allowing parents to stop their children from reading books in schools that cover topics they disagree with. Oh, he also appears to have been instrumental in ICE-snatching pro-Palestine activists off the street. Remember that? Miller still never got over the fact that despite being allowed to write columns and invite white supremacist speakers to his high school and college, he couldn't force the other students and the teachers to love him. So he's been the one to lead the attacks on Harvard and Columbia. He was bitter that he wasn't given enough free speech at school, even though he was allowed to speak and publish his writings and be aggressively unpleasant to everyone around him, because most of the students disagreed with what he said. Now, he wants to force his brand of indoctrination on kids in schools.
This administration is also fighting to get critical race theory out of our school districts. Children will be taught to love America. Children will be taught to be patriots. Children will be taught civic values for schools that want federal taxpayer funding.
Miller wants an authoritarian state that shoves his ideology down the country's unlubricated throat. He is desperate to invoke wartime powers to circumvent rights such as due process. Miller helped orchestrate the use of the Alien Enemies Act to suspend due process for migrants. To quote him, the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion, so that is an option we're actively looking at. And he's been planning all this since at least 2023, during his time establishing He talked about the Alien Enemies Act on some stupid podcast, saying that's been on the books since the John Adams administration, which allows you to deport any alien aged 14 or older without due process if there's a declared state of incursion, of predatory incursion, or invasion from that country. Knowing this, knowing that Stephen Miller actively plans and looks for ways to increase his authoritarian power, this interview in which a reporter asks if Miller has been discussing using the Insurrection Act with Trump is pretty chilling.
This administration is committed to the eradication of organized street violence in the United States of America as one of our top public safety objectives. There is no place for organized street violence in America, whether it be from homegrown crews of street thugs or whether it be from foreign criminal cartels operating on our soil. Every American city should be safe and free from this organized, horrific, bloody street violence that we have tolerated for too long. The Democrat Party as an institution at every level, its judges, its lawyers, its community activists, and its politicians, exists to serve these criminal thugs.
I know it's hard to fully take him seriously when he ends everything in an upward inflection, like the rich Californian that he is. Yes, he's got an annoying cadence. Yes, he's a weird guy. But listen to what he's saying and what he's not saying. He's not denying a discussion about invoking the Insurrection Act. He's emphasizing foreign cartels on American soil. He's essentially calling all Democrats criminal conspirators. He may not have the charisma of Trump, or even the charisma of a misjudged fart, but he knows how to use fear and hate as a scaffold for authoritarianism. And in this answer, he's disgustingly but cleverly setting up a case for using wartime powers by alluding to a foreign threat. His sociopathy isn't simply tolerated by Republicans, it is instrumental to enacting their darkest policies. I don't know if you noticed this, but everything I've described about Stephen Miller from his childhood onward perfectly describes the MAGA movement, this pattern of racist weirdos frustrated that people aren't being forced to like their bad opinions or them as people, calling any criticism or consequences an attack on their free speech while actually snuffing out constitutional rights of others. This manufactured background, wearing a cowboy hat, pretending to be salt of the earth, when the reality is that they're just big city elites. Hell, even this.
Am I the only one who is sick and tired of being told to pick up my trash when we have plenty of janitors who are paid to do it for us?
That is MAGA. Like, think about it. Picking up your trash is an act of personal responsibility in order to maintain a greater good, right? Doing something that's mildly inconvenient to help the collective, which happens to be exactly what we asked people to do by wearing masks during the pandemic. It's all there. It all leads to this one tremendous asshole, this dumpster dildo with clear malice toward most of the American people. As Trump himself said, he wants at least 2/3 of the entire country gone. He is now our shadow president. It is so important that he not only gets removed from that position, but put in jail for the crimes he has done. I know calling for people to be jailed is kind of a Trump thing, and I won't do it often, but this is one of those times. He's a white supremacist who has infiltrated our country, specifically with the goal of enacting white supremacist policy, aka the expulsion of minorities and leftists, and possibly worse. Indiana Jones would punch him in the dick. I don't like him. At all. Sorry about all that stuff I said, Steven. You want to join my band? Thanks everybody for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. We've got a podcast for you. It's called Even More News. You can listen to it or watch it on the channel twice a week, or the podcast store has it as well. You can listen to this as a podcast if you want to imagine that there was a map behind me while this happened. We've got a patreon.com/somemorenews. We've got a merch store with stuff on it. And it is other stuff. So there's some stuff and it's on other stuff. You can look at it, you can, whatever. You know how this goes. But I don't know how it ends because I make it up each time. So I had to, okay. At all.